Wait a second.
I left the city, I've been proud. Treading water that they drowning. My head on a swivel, yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Welcome to episode 128 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at Dynasty_DadFF. Joining me, as always, is my partner in crime, Rookie Fever John. How you doing tonight, brother?
Doing well. It's that time of season where we got to start bringing in some serious analysts and bringing back one of our favorites here. So looking forward to breaking this class down. Everybody knows I got the fever right now, so I'm going to be mixing it up as well. I got a few questions myself. And I think it's important. We talk about our process. Part of that off-season process for us is listening to some of the greats in the industry, kind of comparing notes, learning a few things, and having fun. So I'm looking forward to it.
Right. You and I have been covering the 23 class, and compared to that, I mean, honestly, this is one of our absolute favorite guests. It feels like a yearly just special treat that we have for you guys. And I love the relationship that we've created over the years. It's the TheFFEducator himself, Matt Hicks. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Fellas, we're talking about rookies, hanging out with the Smash Accept guys again. Like, you're right. It does. It feels like an annual draft season tradition now. So I'm excited for it. And listen, I like the way you guys have framed this conversation. You know, I won't give too much away here, but I think it's a good approach to talk about this 2023 class.
Well, and I think that's the thing right now is like we all had that rookie fever coming in and everybody's been talking about 2023s. And I think the biggest thing, you know, you have a Patreon and a Discord chat that I know is absolutely blowing up, you know, and I want you to talk about that real quick. But what's the biggest consensus talk right now with 2023s? Because, you know, when we were getting in, we were trying to buy them. I don't know if you saw on Twitter, I have one league where I have 1 through 12, you know, so like I bought in heavy. We've been pushing it hard since last year when you were on the podcast, because I remember we were talking about how many running backs were equal or above Breece Hall. And I think it's a really good principle to like compare where 22 was versus 23. And tonight, even 23 versus where 24 is. So talk to me a little bit about some of the buzz that I know you have going on.
Yeah, I think this is like the time of the year, right? In terms of folks investing in picks, your picks are gaining more value every day because we're learning about more and more of these prospects, right? We're getting excited about more and more of them. What I love about the 23 class is although we have some studs at the top, and we definitely do, man, there is good depth in this year's class. Like that's where I'm personally struggling right now. Like I look at wide receiver 9 to wide receiver 17, and I'm like, I love all of these dudes. Like I need the combine to happen. I need the draft to happen so I can start sussing out some of this and start, you know, separating them a little bit, because it's tough. I get into the 4th round of mock drafts right now, and there's every single time I'm drafting somebody who I'm like, they should have gone around earlier, you know, for how I'm seeing them right now. So I'm excited about this 2023 class for sure.
And the more we get into this process, I mean, you know, we're going to have Garrett Price on in a couple of weeks, and he put a mock draft exercise out there with some of the landing spots. And I feel like that we've been talking about it. We've been talking about, you know, that 110 to like 204 is such a smash zone where that area is going to have absolute studs in it. But John and I did a pod a couple of weeks ago where that second round is beautiful. Like if you can collect those 23 seconds, the firsts are impossible to get. But even if moving back, I mean, we've been advocating a lot where like if you move back from 111 to 202, 203, 204, and you move, you know, some extra pieces on there, that second round is absolutely beautiful. I mean, like everyone has, I feel like, soured a little bit because we're not talking about, you know, there's that top 5 guys everybody is, and there's that, you know, there's a little spot where there's a lull, but man, this class is deep and it's top heavy at 1 through 5, maybe 1 through 6. And then it's so deep where if you invested in picks, this year is going to be fantastic for you.
Yeah, man, it's a rookie big board mantra every year. Trade for second round picks. And we get to this time of the year, and now everybody wants him, right? But you
Yeah.
should have been trading for him 3-4 months ago.
Yeah.
Not to say if if you could still get him in your leagues, still kick the tires, try to get these picks. But you're right, man. Every single year, top of the second round, like people forget that's where Justin Jefferson was going off the board. T.
Yeah.
Higgins, even Jalen Waddle, right? Like some of my
Mhm.
favorite players,
Right on.
they had an ADP, turning into the second round of rookie drafts. So there's a ton of value every single year. It's the one lesson we never learn, and I'm okay. Like, let's not learn the lesson. Let's just let me get all the value, right?
Yeah. And I think last year when we had you on, I mean, this class looks very similar to 2020 as far as like the top heavy talent, that deep value. And like you said, Jefferson is that guy. And there's so many guys I'm seeing starting to slip into that second round, especially with Hyatt moving up. And, I mean, I did a mock the other day where I got Addison in the second round, and I'm just like, I mean,
Wow,
that blew, it's not going to happen, but like there's going to be some guys that move up, where the right guy goes to Buffalo, the right guy goes to this situation, and it's just got to have that fluid process. Talk to us a little bit about your process, how you do your rookie big board. I mean, it is, guys, if you don't subscribe to their Patreon or you haven't checked out Matt's work, you are literally hiding under a rock for draft season. You need to do it.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think the key to really, being on top of draft season is that draft season never ends for me, right? So I've been watching these guys since last summer. I put together what I call the rookie big board. If you want access to it, it's patreon.com/rookie big board. It's just $3 a month to get access to the rankings and all the good stuff, right? So what I do is I watch a ton of film. So I have 75 player profiles done. That means 75 full film reviews. And then every rookie who's coming out, even the small school guys. So it's like 168 players on the rookie big board right now. And what I'll do is I'll put together a baseline tape grade. I've built out a formula over the years of watching these guys, where by position, I kind of have a good idea of what skills translate specifically for fantasy football purposes, right? All my process is built for fantasy football. And then I factor in draft capital. I actually plug them into my projections. As soon as they're drafted, I have my projection sheet. So they go right in. So we get immediate and long-term value built into that. All that spits out a number that I call rookie big board rating. And then we assess a positional value to that as well. And then everybody kind of gets updated from there. So there's consistency. It takes a lot of time. But I've found that it's a pretty good process, and it really helps kind of highlight some sleepers that get lost in the sauce, all the noise of draft season, right? So, it's a pretty cool process. I know we're going to talk about the 24 class a little bit in comparison here. And what's great is that, I built out Devy and Dynasty rankings that match that same number. So you can compare an incoming rookie here to a Devy or a Dynasty guy. But I've ranted enough about the rookie big board. So we'll get into the action.
I mean, it's something to be proud of, honestly.
Yeah.
And John and I direct people on our Patreon and people to yours because it's that consistency, right? And I reference your work a lot because I see everyone's got rankings out there, right? But like, there's no consistency or way they come up. And I've been watching some of your YouTube videos. By the way, that YouTube channel is blowing up. I love what you've been doing with those rookie profiles, and I think it's consumable, but then you have consistency with what you've been doing, this time of year, there's so many people on Twitter just putting their rankings out there blindly and just throwing things around there. So kudos to you, keep up the great work. John and I want to just start jumping into players, and obviously we don't need to talk a ton about Bijan Robinson because he is clearly that 101, and I have people asking me what would he have to do to not be the 101, and I don't know there's a scenario there. The one guy even asked me if he got in a car accident next week or got hit in the grocery store. I'm like, okay, chill. Maybe that's not the way we want to go with it. But I mean, my question is, how big is the gap between, we had several guys in the Patreon asking about that 101 to 102 in a super flex, and then that 101 to 102 in a one quarterback league, because I think John and I have been talking a lot. There is some serious value to be had if you're not quite in position for, a running back, you're in a rebuild situation. And so many people are asking, if I'm moving back to Bryce Young or CJ Stroud in a super flex, or I'm moving back to Jahmyr Gibbs or JSN in a one quarterback, what kind of value are you looking to add on to that?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces to this puzzle, right? There's actual value and then there's perceived trade value. And I think at this point in time, we just had this discussion actually in the Rookie Big Board Discord earlier today. At what point is it enough to move back from Bijan Robinson, right? And my answer was you need a running back one, a dynasty running back one back, and I need a quarterback one, I need a wide receiver one because he has that
Okay.
much perceived
Mm-hmm.
value right now.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the rookie big board is we do break it down by tier, and those tiers kind of line up to how they're going to affect your fantasy football roster. Bijan Robinson is in my franchise cornerstone tier, which is my second highest one. Nobody's ever hit my highest tier. So it's Bijan and Trevor Lawrence were the two highest guys that have ever been in the rookie big board. And then Bryce Young and Jahmyr Gibbs are, that next tier down. And that's probably going to be the 102 in a super flex or a one quarterback league. So it's a full tier drop, which is really significant. And I think it's important to point out at this point, like year in and year out, I am the guy that pushes up quarterback value in rookie drafts, right? So like this is with some pushed up value on Bryce Young because there's so much, if you hit on those quarterbacks, it's so good for your roster, right? So valuable. So that being said, it's still far and away Bijan Robinson. And I never thought that I would be here talking about a class where the running back is so far and away higher than the quarterback.
Well, and we had that last year when you were on the show with Breece Hall. Talk to me about, the 101 of Breece Hall last year, the 101 this year of Bijan, and then the 101 next year of likely Caleb Williams. So let's talk a little bit about those values, a little bit of comparison as far as where Bijan is in comparison to where Breece Hall was for you last year, and then a little bit alluding into what, that 101 next year might look like.
Yeah, so that's really good. So right now, Kenneth Walker and Breece Hall are right next to each other in my dynasty rankings. They're both assessed at an 8.4, which is the top of the tier below Bijan Robinson. I call it league winner. For me, a league winner is somebody, each a running back one, you're putting them in your lineup, you're not worried about it. Where franchise cornerstone, which is where I have Bijan Robinson, is like they're just going to dominate, right? They're a game changer. There's somebody who's going to come in, they're going to put up like 20 points a week, and they're just going to be slate breakers. But that being said, I think Kenneth Walker and Breece Hall were good prospects coming out. We talked about that last year. I actually had Kenneth Walker slightly above Breece Hall, which was a little against consensus. But if we're comparing these guys, they're nowhere near Bijan Robinson in terms of when they were prospects coming out versus when Bijan Robinson or where Bijan Robinson is now. That being said, I think Caleb Williams coming into next year's class, because of that quarterback value, right, has an opportunity to get there. Now, right now in my Devy rankings, Caleb Williams is an 8.1. Okay. So that, it's lower than Bijan Robinson certainly now, but part of my Devy rankings is there's always volatility, right? From year one to year two, you never know what's going to happen. You don't want to wish injury upon anybody. Some guys just decide to come back for an extra year, and you have to factor in the time it takes for them to produce fantasy points, right? Trevor Lawrence was one of the best quarterback prospects we've seen in the last decade. And I mean, guys, it took a year and a half, probably we're going to have to get into his third season for him to be a consistent quarterback one. And I'm not knocking him. That's the process, right? Josh Allen wasn't that way. Lamar Jackson wasn't that way until year 3. So I do factor that into my process. That being said, Caleb Williams is fantastic. Dual threat quarterback, huge arm, awesome athleticism, right? He performed well in year 1 at Oklahoma. He transfers. I know he stayed with the same coach, but he transferred teams, transferred teammates, and he won the Heisman in year 1 at USC, right? So it's hard to ask much more. He's got good size, 6'1", 218, has opportunity to build out that frame a little bit more as well. So I do expect, if the 2024 draft happened right now, that Caleb Williams would be the 101 in Superflex leagues. But, I do have to factor in that wait time. So Bijan Robinson, to me, on a 1-to-1 is still well above him.
I love that. And John, that's got to make you happy. I know you and I have been talking about Bijan. John's a Texas guy and has been watching Bijan firsthand. I know that's got to get you pumped.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that's exactly the right way to look at it. We've been debating this as well, kind of in our own Discord. And you do have to factor in some of that risk for waiting another year. We don't know what might happen there. And so I think it's the right way to look at it. And 23 is in the here and now. Rookie fever is about what I can get right now. And again, that perceived value that we have with Bijan, we've been saying the same thing, Matt. So it's good to hear it from you, in a tier of his own. And I think we're about to kind of jump into that next tier. But I did want to ask you this, because we talk about the importance of tiers, especially at this stage in the offseason. And it sounds like you've approached that as well. How much do you depend on tiers pre-combine, pre-draft, and kind of the quick follow-on to that is how much do you adjust? Like you said, you have your formula, you input certain things from the combine, from the draft capital, and a landing spot. But we think it's very important that you already kind of have your rankings and tiers at this point heading into this. So you're basing it on talent. Is kind of the same process
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah. Tiers are everything. For me, if you're not doing rankings and tiers, I think it's just so difficult to place a value.
Right?
And we
Yeah.
have this discussion all the time, in the Rookie Big Board Discord. We're talking about the idea of, I really like this wide receiver. How would you rank Hyatt, Downs, Quentin Johnston? Don't worry about it. Don't just make sure they're all in the same bucket, for now, because there's going to be so many factors that help, nuance them later in the process, right? For me, film is about 65% of my evaluation.
Yeah.
And then I do balance that with landing spot, right? And draft capital, because those things equal volume. And if you don't have volume and opportunity, you don't have fantasy football points, right? So
Right on.
I will make pretty significant adjustments if somebody falls way outside of my draft capital. But I think the other thing built into my formula right now is I do have actual draft projections on these guys, and that factors into their rating, right? Because I've seen the NFL draft enough. I feel pretty good about, being able to put these guys in draft buckets as well. So kind of a long-winded way of saying tiers are everything. Draft capital is important, but it's not the only thing, right? So it factors in. It's about 35% of my total formula when combined with my actual projection. So it's not just draft capital, but landing spot projection, all that good stuff.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that gets you set up. I mean, a lot of people were saying, hey, Dad, John, why are you guys covering these rookies so early? And it's like, we start to put these tiers together. We start to put this, we have guests on like you, where we're formulating this plan of where our tiers are. And then we adjust accordingly. So you don't have those situations where you take Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was your RB6, and make him your RB1 and make him the 101 of Dynasty. It's just like we're trying to prevent those types of situations. You said Gibbs is in your second tier. Where exactly do you have him, and do you have anyone else? Because I want to start with running backs. We have the biggest, like our Discord is always asking, how big of a gap is there between Jahmyr Gibbs and Zach Evans and Sean Tucker, Charbonnet, Bigsby, all of those guys. So talk to me a little bit about where those gaps are, and then let's start hitting on those prospects.
Yeah, I think that's really shaping the running back class right now, right? So we talked about it, Bijan, tier of its own. It's really interesting. If we didn't have Bijan Robinson in this year's class, we'd be talking about Jahmyr Gibbs so much more. I love his athleticism. I love his elusiveness. I love his vision, and a fantastic pass catcher. Like, Gibbs is somebody we could realistically plug into a projection sheet for 75 to 80 targets in his rookie season alone, right? And we know, man, if you're catching the ball, you're a game changer for fantasy football. So Gibbs is in his own tier as well for me. And then after that, that's when you get into like the my guy tier, right? So you could order Zach Evans, Sean Tucker, Zach Charbonnet, and Tank Bigsby in any order you want for me, and I'm going to be cool with it at this point in time, right?
Yeah.
A great example of, let's just understand that these guys are still in the same neighborhood. And kind of, a small, we'll call it a half tier down, Devin Achane is in that range.
Yeah.
Certainly somebody to be excited about as well. So I'd say those 5 guys, you're mixing it up. And those are going to be guys who, through the combine, through the draft, depending on who gets those juicy volume landing spots, those guys could really shoot themselves up or down.
I'm glad you said that then, because that's what we've been saying too, is like, I personally have Charbonnet a little bit higher. A lot of guys John has Evans, and a lot of guys in the Discord have it. And it's just a matter of like where that landing spot is. And that's why we tried to play around with that, 2 weeks ago. What are those juicy landing spots for you? Because outside of, I think Miami is about as juicy as it possibly gets, but a lot of people are torn. They're like, oh, I think this is a great spot. Where do we want these guys to go? Where are some landing spots where you would say, man, if Charbonnet goes there, if Bigsby goes there, if any of these Tucker goes, where do they move?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because I have just spent many hours building out the individual projections for every NFL team. So I've been thinking about this a lot over the last couple weeks here. You mentioned it. Miami's the juicy landing spot, and their first pick is right because they lost. Remember, they lost their first round pick for the
Mm-hmm.
tampering. So their first selection is right in that, borderline top 50 running back spot. So
Sweet spot.
they won't get Bijan. They probably won't get Gibbs, but they're going to take Evans or Tucker or Sharp or, potentially Tank. And that could be a really nice landing spot, right? So you're going to plug that guy into your projection sheet for probably 220 touches right off the bat. And then, on the ground, and then add in some passing volume, depending on which one of those guys. The other one is Carolina. Carolina is an empty backfield at this point in time. I believe Chuba is the only running back on the roster right now. They do have a good amount of draft capital in the early second round as well, left over from the CMC trade. So I definitely think that they're going to be looking in that second round range to reinvest in the running back position. And then there's some sneakier ones, that push past the obvious volume. I do think Dallas is actually an interesting spot right now, potentially using their third round pick. If Tank falls a little bit, I think I like Tank to Dallas a lot. I don't think that they're going to end up with Zeke and Pollard this year. So I think maybe one of those guys is there. And maybe Tank could end up either splitting or taking over that backfield long term. That's the other thing I try to always point out for the running back position. Each and every year, there's only going to be 2 or maybe 3 really juicy landing spots for a running back that we can project volume right away. So you kind of have to get creative and think about, 1, 2, 3 years down the road, or find a running back who's going to plug in as running back 2 in the depth chart and recognize the fact that running backs get injured all the time, right? So who, if they're running back 2, can become an awesome running back 1 if they get the shot, right? So, even think about if the Giants re-sign Barkley, right? I've been mock drafting Roshan Johnson to the Giants a lot in the back end of day 2. The running back 2 for the Giants, if Barkley's back, could be a really awesome, opportunity, if somebody who has struggled with injury in the past misses a few games, right? So those are kind of some of the landing spots that I'm looking at for running backs.
I'm glad you brought up Roshan because I think there's some guys that we talked about him last podcast. Another guy that's kind of fallen under the radar sometimes is Kendre Miller, Tajay Spears. Who are those next set of running backs? Because I think you're right. There's that group of 4 or 5 guys there that everyone has in that same area. And then one thing that you've been amazing on the last couple of years is hitting on some of those lesser known running backs early. And I think the better and the earlier you get on to those trains where you can move into certain areas to get those guys, I think it is just money in the bank.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that next tier of running backs, I call it my flex filler tier. So those are my running back 2-3s, right? Not necessarily guys if you're plugging into the running back slot itself, but if you got a lot of flex spots, or as we know, injuries happen, right? So these are guys who maybe aren't putting up monster weeks, but you need them in your lineup, right? So in no particular order necessarily, this tier for me: Chase Brown out of Illinois, Kenny McIntosh out of Georgia, Eric Gray out of Oklahoma, Dwayne McBride out of Alabama, Birmingham, Roshan Johnson out of Texas, and Tajay Spears out of Illinois, or Tajay Spears out of Tulane, sorry. And then Deuce Vaughn, Kendre Miller, right, are kind of finding themselves in this tier.
Yeah.
And this tier is going to shake out a ton depending on how I can project these guys out, right? But I got to tell you, my favorite guy, my most underrated guy in this group is Eric Gray out of Oklahoma. I really like Eric Gray. I think he's really shifty as a runner. I think he's an underrated athlete. He's not going to burn, but he is explosive. He has great long speed. He's fast into the second level of the field, and a super underrated pass catcher as well. So I think he sneaks into the back end of day 2, like pick 102 or something, like really, really gets in there at the end. And then the other one I feel like isn't getting enough hype is Dwayne McBride out of Alabama, Birmingham. He's not going to be, another guy who's not going to burn necessarily at the combine, but has really nice tape. And even though he's a Sun Belt player, he has good tape against Power 5 opponents. Alabama Birmingham had some good Power 5 opponents, and he holds up well. He's got good strength. He's got great acceleration and good vision. So somebody we were talking about a ton at the start of the draft process and kind of has gotten lost in the noise here, but could be an early day 3 selection, come April.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. John, any more running back questions? Because there's a lot of wide receivers. I know it's very deep, and I want to get into that. But I know running backs is your thing, and I know some of those guys in there. I know you've been moving up your boards as well.
Yeah, the one that is getting so much hype right now is Tajay Spears, and we had a chance to see him there at the Senior Bowl, and just incredible the speed burst. He gets north to south so fast he can like stop on a dime and make defenders look pretty foolish at times.
Yeah.
But I just kind of I know about the injury, and he kind of came on late. It wasn't really a known thing in the Debbie circles for the longest time. So I'm trying to figure out the right way to look at this guy. How have you kind of concluded, on him recently after what you've seen Senior Bowl?
Yeah, he's fun, right? He's a super fun player.
Yeah.
Really great production in college. Definitely got a nice bump from the Senior Bowl. It's going to be really interesting to see the medicals, right? I think what's really important
I agree.
for folks to understand about the medicals in Indianapolis is, say a team doctor checks out, Tajay Spears. They don't like what they see with the knee. It's not like that team drops Tajay Spears down a round, right, on their board. He's off the board. If you get flagged by the medical staff, you're off the board. So Tajay Spears, after he does medicals, he might be off of 10 boards, and then you think about it, another 10 teams might not want a running back. Another 5 teams are drafted a running back already before they get into Tajay Spears' range. So that's why for me, I do have him as a day 3 selection, even though, he has flashes of day 2 tape. And so that draft capital is what's kind of holding him down a little bit.
Okay.
I've seen some folks with top 5 on Tajay Spears. It's just too rich for me with the
too much risk
of the
there.
other running backs. Yeah.
And I think that's the whole, out of sight, out of mind. He's in there. We're not talking about some of these other guys, and we see him at the Senior Bowl, and then people start to get excited and start double counting things. And I think that happens a lot during the process. We're going to have the combine soon, and people realize that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to run something in the 4.3s, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, we need to move him up. He should already be there. We don't start double counting that. I want to talk a little bit about the wide receivers, because we talked about that same bucket. Those top 4 wide receivers, I feel like are slightly above everywhere else. Obviously, we're talking, and I want to know how close you have them. JSN, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson, and now Jalen Hyatt in that area. How close do you have these guys? And, how much higher up are they than that next tier down there with Boutte and Downs and that type area?
It's really interesting with this class. It's JSN and Addison for me in the top tier, the league winner tier. So not the Bijan, but the Jahmyr Gibbs tier, right?
Okay.
Same.
And, in terms of rookie drafts, I have seen, in terms of ADP that it's settling that Gibbs is going consistently above Addison and JSN. And I understand that. But, I have no qualms if you want to take JSN or Addison above Jahmyr Gibbs. Just in terms of, I think they're a similar talent level.
Okay.
But they're at the bottom of the league winner tier. And then at the top of the weekly starter tier for me is Jalen Hyatt, Josh Downs, and Quentin Johnston in that order. So there is a gap between those 2 in the next 3, but it's not a huge gap necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, do you see? Right. I have a lot of people saying, they're seeing a lot of mock drafts with Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson, when you watch highlights, right, has that huge ceiling, but the floor is considerably lower. Where JSN and Addison, John and I have been just gushing about literally how high that floor is. Yeah. I mean, that floor is like mid wide receiver 2. I mean, I think people are starting to look at them and they're not seeing what kind of actual talent that Jordan Addison and Jackson Smith and Jigba. I mean, people are literally just saying, well, once we get past Gibbs, we're starting to move back out. And I want you to just talk about how good those 2 wide receivers are, because we've been trying to, let everybody know, but I see it all over Twitter where people are just thinking we need to start moving back out of that area.
Yeah, I think for me, the reason JSN is my wide receiver 1 is, and I think what, isn't really super grasped about him is he really only has 1 full year of production. And I love what I've seen from his tape. Very athletic, fantastic hands, great catch radius. He's not going to burn in the running a 40-yard dash, but he separates at all 3 levels of the field. He separates downfield. He's kind of getting a knock for only being an inside guy. I think he could play inside or outside, depending on what an NFL team wants to do. And guess what, folks? When you come in at 6'0", 200 now, it doesn't matter if you're playing on the inside. That seam could be a really dangerous spot to play in, right? That's all CeeDee Lamb is playing in now. It's not hurting him, right? So But the thing about JSN is I still think he's raw athletically. Like he could get into an NFL offense and get coached up, and he could easily blow away the rest of the players in this class. So in terms of tape evaluation, from what I've seen, it's almost equal with Addison, but I'm giving him the bump for upside. Whereas I do think Addison is a little bit more of a finished product, and that's not in a bad way. He's got great experience. Addison is a very clean route runner, very consistent hands. I don't think I've ever seen a defensive back within 3 yards of Jordan Addison, right? Unless they've gotten past the end zone and they finally catch up to him. So, sometimes it's unquantifiable how much consistent separation you get. And to me, that's what you're seeing with Jordan Addison.
Yeah.
I think it
sticks out.
Yeah, yeah. And what's what I think folks are underrating with Jordan Addison is this guy, dominates at Pitt, which is not a school known for passing the ball. Yeah, wins the Blindikoff, and then goes and transfers to USC. So he in a totally different scheme, right? A totally different quarterback, and he leads his team in every receiving category, right? Like that's so impressive. So you're showing me scheme versatility, right? And when folks are talking about floor, that's part of it. I don't care where he goes. I'm going to project him for 90 targets and 6 touchdowns. I don't care.
It.
You know what I mean? I'm going to find those
that's
targets.
Spot on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. And that kind of makes him a little bit more bulletproof. Where do you have those? I know we were talking about in comparison, there's some big time wide receivers in 2024 coming out as well. And I think, obviously 22 had Wilson and London and Olave. How do you put those guys in there, and talk to me a little bit about those 24 wide receivers, because there's some juicy players coming up.
Marvin Harrison Jr. All right. 6'3", 202, super athletic, plays so well along the boundary, is fast, great hands. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be, I currently have him valued over Addison and JSN. And I just talked about earlier, he's taking a hit, right? Because of the time it takes for him to get to the league. Yeah. So he will be,
I think that's right,
part of the draft next year. He's probably going to be the highest graded wide receiver since CeeDee Lamb for me. And I graded CeeDee very high. I had him definitely above Judy in that class, which I know is against consensus. You guys know I loved Olave, I loved Waddle, I loved Jefferson. Harrison Jr. is going to be graded above all of those guys. Probably in that same tier as Jamar Chase. That's probably going to be a pretty comfortable range for him. So, we might be talking about, should a wide receiver be the 101 in the 2024 class? Marvin Harrison Jr. can absolutely find himself in that place. He's good.
And that's always a tricky thing. And I think the dynasty community, especially this year after getting burnt by running backs, we've understand how volatile that position was. And, when I first started this thing in 2014, it was all about those wide receivers. And then we switched over to the running backs. And I think we're starting to see the value in the longevity and the security of drafting those wide receivers. You talked about Downs and you talked about Quentin Johnson and one more guy in that, and then also Hyatt in that tier. Those guys, I think, especially Hyatt seems like he's jumped up more than anybody. I mean, Quentin Johnson and Downs have been there, but a lot of people, Hyatt just keeps moving up those boards. So let's hit on all three of those guys real quick, and then also where would they fall in as well as on your rookie big board?
Yeah, Hyatt's my wide receiver 3. I think that's probably the highest that I've seen him. I love Jalen Hyatt. I understand he's speed, and I think some folks get scared off by speed, but I'm telling you, it does not stop with the speed for Jalen Hyatt. He has a great release. I love the way that he separates off coverage. He has very consistent hands. In terms of physicality, he's developed a lot from 2021 to 2022. And I understand he doesn't have the most, technical route running, but he wasn't asked to be the most technical route runner. And that's something I don't knock college players on. I don't, give them a penalty for doing things that are not doing things they weren't asked to do. What I do know Jalen Hyatt can do is run a nasty slant, and he can burn over the top with a vertical. And honestly, that could get you pretty far in the NFL, right? Especially if an NFL team wants to play him inside. I don't think they have to. I think they can play him outside. So I love Jalen Hyatt. I'm not comparing him 1-to-1, but the way that I was talking about Jalen Waddle and in terms of the value that I got on Jalen Waddle, I think he does win in a similar way. Waddle was a little bit more of a technical route runner. So again, not a 1-to-1. But the other thing to remember is Jalen Hyatt, again, has only played one full season of full-time action at the college level. I think he's moldable, and I think an NFL team is going to love him. It would not shock me if Hyatt is wide receiver 1 off the NFL draft board this year.
Wow, I see
That would
like
be fun, yeah.
Yeah, that's good to look at because I think every year we see guys where there's always that one guy that's consensus goes through. I'm looking at a lot of mock drafts now, and it's kind of all over the board. I mean, how many wide receivers do you guys see, John and Matt, see going in that first round? I mean, we've been looking at it a lot in that first. We're looking at least round 1, round 2 draft capital. Who are those wide receivers that you think go round 1?
I think it's interesting. So for me, I break down draft capital a little bit differently too. I think this is a great example of like why it helps to talk through the process, right? So my buckets are 1 through 10, so a top 10 selection, and then 11 through 20, and then
Okay, yeah.
I break that down because there's not 32 players that each and every year are evaluated by the NFL as first round talent. It's usually between 18 and 22 players every year. So I draw that line at 20. So, if I do a top 20 selection, and then 21 through 50 is my next bucket, that top 50 player. And most, my prediction this year is that one wide receiver will come off the board in the top 20. And then like 6 might come off the board, 21 to 50, right? I'm not sure who that one wide receiver is yet, but I think there's going to be one. And then from 21 to 50, even just looking at team need in that range, we definitely could get, I think, at minimum 4. We could probably get up to 6 guys in that range. So that's what's going to make draft night really fun.
That's absolutely brilliant talking about it that way because I've always looked at, hey, you get round 1 draft capital, but looking at it from 1 through 20 in that area, and then, the 3 different buckets there, that's really cool. And that's something that I think it definitely we need to look at going forward. John,
go ahead. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking, if I look at that first round grade, and I've been paying attention a lot to what a lot of the other analysts and scouts and mock drafts saying, I guess if I had to set the over under, I'd put it at 4 right now that might go in the first. And if I had to put a bet on first wide receiver off the board, I still kind of have to come back to Jordan Addison. I think that he could end up being that guy. This is like a safe pick that I think a lot of NFL teams would love to have on their roster right now. And I think you're probably right. The first 20 picks, you're looking at all this other talent, might be 1, maybe 2, but I still kind of keep coming back to the Texans at 12, trying to give their new QB a weapon right out of the gates, and that'd be fun. I mean, see something like Bryce Young throwing to Jordan Addison or something like that.
Yeah, we talked about the running back landing spots, but I mean the wide receiver landing spots. There's a lot of teams out there looking for a number 1, number 2. Teams super needy like the New York Giants, and we know that this free agent class it's Jacoby Myers, Juju. It ain't pretty. I mean Keenan's likely a cap casualty and some of those kind of things. What are those landing spots right now? And maybe it's too early even for the wide receivers as opposed to the running backs, but through your research, is there any wide receiver landing spots that really would catapult one of these guys?
What I think is nice about the wide receiver position is there's a lot more opportunity, to fit into an offense. There's going to be, potentially 2 to 3 wide receivers on any NFL offense that's going to have the opportunity to be productive. So there's certainly more exciting spots, LA at 22. Like, can the Chargers please take this wide receiver, right? Especially if they're going to cut Allen.
Yes.
So,
how about JSN to the Chargers? Wouldn't that be fun?
Oh gosh, JSN. Well, here's the thing. I would love JSN, but I am a Giants fan, so I need JSN to just slide a couple more spots.
Okay.
Make it to the Giants there. So I think New York would be a great spot. I mean, geez, pick any of these guys. It's probably 100 targets, in his rookie season.
Right.
So that would be a great landing spot as well. The Saints, have just moved up to get that former San Francisco pick. So they get into that pick 30. I think that's a really, exciting spot to be in right there. And then, you turn the corner and things start to get a little bit thinner in the early second round in terms of juicy landing spots. But I do think, Detroit's kind of slept on, a player who might be closer to pick 50. I know they have JMO and Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I think there is actually opportunity. Jared Goff passes the ball a lot more than folks realize. So I
Hmm.
think that's a kind of a sneaky
Okay.
spot as well. So lots of good potential there.
I love it. The last part that I want to talk about real quick is the quarterback. So we talk about guys start moving up draft boards, and I think I'm looking at Todd McShay's last mock draft. He had Bryce Young going 1, Stroud going 2 to the Texans, Will Levis going 7 to the Raiders, and Richardson going 9 to the Panthers. I mean, Matt, if we have 4 quarterbacks go top 10 in the NFL draft, I see a lot of people have some of these guys late first round, maybe even early second round. What happens to these quarterback values? And this is something where I think through the process and through the years, even drafting with you in a couple drafts, you start to see those quarterbacks. These teams really need quarterbacks. There's a super flex, super shortage right now of good quarterbacks. These guys go top 10. I mean, where does that put them? Young and Stroud are going to be 2 and 3 or in that 1 through 4. But what does that do for Will Levis and Anthony Richardson if they get top 10 draft capital?
Yeah, it's really interesting for me with Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. I do expect they'll both be top 10 draft picks. And when I've done my mock drafts, that's exactly where I've been sending them. Will Levis at 7, Anthony Richardson at 9. And for me, I mentioned it earlier, a top 10 pick is a top 10 pick in terms of my draft capital formula, so they would all kind of be in that same draft capital bucket. So then it would really come down to my tape evaluation on these players.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm much, much higher on Anthony Richardson. And from what I'm seeing, I think ADP kind of reflects that. The reason that I'm in on Richardson, it's twofold. One, he's the right type of risk to take, right? When we're talking about quarterback hit rates are low. That's why they're so valuable, because there's not as many good ones out there. And especially when we're playing in super flex leagues, we need those good quarterbacks, right? So if we're going to hit on one of these guys, let's hit on one of these guys with major traits. And Anthony Richardson has a fantastic arm. There's examples on tape of him having excellent precision, great touch, examples, not consistent. And in terms of being a runner, he is elusive, he is fast, and he is physical, right? So I think, are not talking enough about his rushing capacity. I think we put all rushing quarterbacks in one bucket, and he is not Kyler Murray, right? He's got a little bit of Josh Allen in terms of physicality mixed with a little bit of Lamar-esque speed. So there's a lot to come. And a huge frame, too. I mean, he's coming in at 6'4", 236. The thing about Anthony Richardson is I think he's an underrated passer in terms of his ability to manage the offense. He's comfortable sitting in the pocket, and he is comfortable working through progressions. Does he need to develop? Yes, significantly. Does he have decision-making issues? Yes, significantly. But those are things that, that we're expecting him to develop through a redshirt year in the NFL, which I do think if he lands with Carolina, which is where I expect him to land, he will go there. It wouldn't shock me if the Colts pull the trigger on him at 4 or wherever they end up picking 2. So it'll be interesting to see, kind of exactly how that plays out. But I am much higher on Anthony Richardson. And in terms of ADP, I think right now he's settled into 107, the highest player not in that top tier of guys we've been talking about. But I could see him breaking in there, pushing Addison or even JSN down the board to get us a little bit more value.
I like that. The other Will Levis is a little bit more polarizing. John, I know, a lot of, I'm looking at Matt, your ADP from your Discord has him at 206, and I keep seeing him in that range. Again, if he goes top 10, I mean, are people going to start pushing him into that late first? And is that reaching for you guys, John?
Yeah, I think it would be for me, but I expect that to happen. I think that we'll see Will Levis in his ADP in that kind of even potentially mid first range, way too rich for my blood. But I think we'll see him settle into late first range, and I'm just not going to have a lot of shares based on kind of what Matt was saying there. I think that the tools are there, but we've seen it time and time again that's not necessarily enough. I think if you do take him, you're going to have to be patient with him. Same thing with Anthony Richardson for all the reasons Matt stated. I love the ceiling on these guys, and I think that's going to be very attractive to a lot of dynasty drafters. But I think you would really need to be patient. If you're trying to compete with those guys in year 1, probably year 2, you might struggle a little bit to hit the expectations. I think you're looking at something more like year 3 after these guys have some time, hopefully in the right system with the right coaching to develop those tools that they have. That's what we're kind of hoping to see here in the draft.
And that's why we had. I love talking to you always, and love having Matt on here. I mean, I'm hearing a couple other major podcasts have him all the way up at 104, and I'm struggling there.
Can't get there
with this kind of class.
No.
Matt, I'm excited because everything that you have going on, I want you to share a little bit more. And what we're going to do after this is we're going to do a mini pod for you guys on the Patreon of Matt, myself, and John. We're going to go over our 23 and 24 mock draft. We're going to do 2 rounds, and just that way you guys can see where I do it a lot on my Twitter account, is just try to let you guys see where the 22s versus 23s are, where the 23s versus 24s, because there's that line where you start working yourself in there, start trying to get that 24 capital. So Matt, tell everybody where they can find your work again. And this has been fun. Like every year, honestly, I feel like we get on here, we have you on, and it feels like 5 minutes have gone by, and I'm learning stuff, but it's been almost an hour. You know what I mean? You have this exuberance and like just passion for what you do, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah, man, it's always fun. Rookie Big Board on YouTube, Rookie Big Board in your your favorite podcast feed, and again, Rookie Big Board, patreon.com/Rookie Big Board. It's awesome, man. Just if nothing else, it's worth it just to jump into the Discord. Like we're talking these prospects every day. We're talking about trade value. We have an on the clock channel, so we're always getting asked, I'm on the clock now. What pick should I make depending on what's happening in my draft? And in mid-March, we're dropping 100-plus page rookie guide, full player profiles on all these guys that we've been talking about, plus a lot more with ADP in there, with a lot of a draft strategy in there as well. So again, man, like $3 a month, that's what gets you access to it. So I think it's well worth it. And if you're a sicko like us listening to this full podcast, breaking down rookies, we're doing it year round, right? And the process is year round. The best way to get good at it is to start early. So I think that's a good spot to be, in my opinion.
Cheaper than a cup of coffee, man. That's a great deal.
Yeah.
Go out and get that. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the process. All right. I'm going to send you guys a link.